Can you? Two. 1, 2. Yeah, it works. Perfect. Okay, now we have a very challenging task to shout out and so that we are heard. But I'm very much grateful and privileged to open our today's event held in the Ukraine's pavilion with the host that is Ukraine Energy Transition Hub that was successfully launched in October 2023, got its fully support from the European Commission, and as you know, that the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine offers the chance to prioritize sustainability and low carbon development and to work towards a structurally independent energy system. And as you know, it should and it can help underpin Ukraine's seamless integration into the European Union market and can position the country as a front runner to the global energy transition. And our today's discussion, which I'm very privileged to moderate, would bring outstanding and acknowledged researchers and experts from all of the areas. Some of them would be representing the Europe-Ukraine Energy Transition Hub. They would be the representatives of the Ukrainian government and international experts in climate and energy policies. And together we will try to come up with the vision how we can ensure the green and sustainable transition. And of course, what is the role of the energy sector here? Thank you very much for finding the time to join us today. And now I will take my more comfortable role. I suggest our discussion to be made around all of the respective participants. So please feel free to ask questions to each other. Please feel free to share your expertise on those questions. But I would be going round by introducing you. And the first speaker, which I would be very eager to hear the expertise from, is Michael Melling. He is a Deputy Director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy and a research center of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he has pioneered and reaches an empirical study of energy and environmental policies for nearly half a century. And the first and foremost question, which I would like you to ask, how international climate regime and Paris Agreement influences. So what is the role of it in green reconstruction of Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenya. It's a pleasure also and privilege for me to be in this pavilion at this point in time to address that question. Just to make sure that nobody thinks I'm way older than a half a century, she was referring to the center. I did turn half a century a few months ago, so I'm very sensitive, but I certainly haven't worked on climate policy that long. And I'll put an international lawyer hat on. As a lawyer, I think many of us are lawyers. We all know, of course, that the international climate regime has chosen an architecture that is bottom up, that is nationally determined. So it's very hard to find sort of hard obligations, hard constraints on sovereign countries like Ukraine, what they have to do, you know. There are obviously the obligations of conduct that Ukraine will have, like any other party, submitting NDCs progressively more ambitious every 5 years, having, you know, the biannual transparency reports, all that. I think, though, that Ukraine is a little bit unique compared to other countries, other parties to the Paris Agreement, in that it faces a tremendous rebuilding challenge. And that means that almost half of its energy sector infrastructure and assets, a large share of industrial assets, et cetera, that are highly emissive, are now going to be rebuilt. Other existing assets are at the end of their lifetime. So there is a transformation that has no parallel in most other countries. And I think that that does mean probably that Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement, which does require developed countries, which, and I'll go to that maybe in a successive question, Ukraine, for some historical reasons, is in that category, even have to move faster than developing countries in ensuring that their anthropogenic emissions and by sources, but also removals by sinks, reach a balance, so essentially emissions neutrality, early in the second half of the century. Because of this tremendous rebuilding effort and the long life of these assets once they're built, and the risk of stranded assets, the risk of, emissive legacies, I feel like the Paris Agreement may have a bit more of an effect in holding Ukraine or guiding it on a path of ensuring that this rebuilding effort is green, is sustainable, is low emissions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing this up, that the Paris Agreement, it is there. And but what do you think, what does it lack? What does the international regime does lack in order for addressing the war-torn nations? What do these nations, what can these nations bring to international regime, to COP28, so that the some innovative strategies that can focus on climate resilience in the face of the conflict-induced challenges?
So I already alluded to the fact that Ukraine is categorized as a developed country in the sort of dichotomy of the Framework Convention, which has historical reasons. But we all know that the world has changed and evolved. And so per capita GDP in Ukraine, especially now after the conflict, is lower than many lower middle income and even lower income countries that are developing countries around the world. So this, for instance, affects the access of Ukraine to certain instruments that the convention and the Paris Agreement provide, like the financial mechanism, the Green Climate Fund, for instance, the Least Developed Country Fund, of course, but also the Special Climate Change Fund. These are not accessible to Ukraine. There's a Global Environment Facility, which is also part of the financial mechanism, which has been dispersing funds at a relatively small level. So that means that unless the architecture evolves, and there's tremendous pressure, I find, and I think many would share, that a framework that is based on the world 30 years ago no longer necessarily reflects what we need to decarbonize globally, but also to reflect the national circumstances in countries such as Ukraine in a war situation. There is pressure to evolve, but it's a slow process. And in the meantime, because this is so slow, we will be looking at regional or national instruments. And I hope Gianpiero will tell us, for instance, what the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development can do in that role. The Paris Agreement, the convention, don't leave as many tools as we probably should have, some of which developed countries have access to. Ukraine does not. There's, for instance, Article 6, but all of us, I think, know that there's a lot of questions whether this will scale up, become a meaningful source of finance. Capacity building, technology transfer, these are not limited to developing countries, of course, but there's no hard quantifiable obligations. Nonetheless, I think like the Ukraine Energy Transition Hub is an example of how capacity building by other parties, in a way also reflect their commitment under the Paris Agreement. So it's hard to find hard channels, hard instruments that will benefit. And there is sort of this process of trying to recalibrate the way the international regime works, but it's probably going to be too slow to really tackle all the challenges Ukraine faces, which is why we have to look to the national and regional level.
Thank you so much. And can I dare to break a little bit of the structure of the consequences, and maybe we can pass on to you right away, right? As far as the topic of the financing has been already touched, can you please outline for us what the current landscape of the financing of the energy transition and green recovery of Ukraine is, and drawing from the legal perspective, what are the biggest challenges from your side? And let me introduce Gianpiero Naci. He's an acting director, Green Economy and Climate Action, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And he has over 25 years of experience, not 50, 25 years of experience in climate finance, sustainable energy, energy efficiency, circular economy, renewable energy, and climate governance. So it would be really great to hear what is your take on that.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's really an honor, a pleasure to be here. Let me start with, I'm going slightly, not really off topic, but I like to give a strong message about, EBRD commitment to Ukraine. Ukraine is part of our strategic operational identity, and we are really committed to increase the level of activity and support the country at this current situation, but also going forward. Now, going back to your question, there are a number of considerations, before we go into what are the financial instruments? I think we need to think in terms of what are the enabling conditions, what ultimately would facilitate finance to flow towards the energy systems. Because it's clear that, particularly in the context of, developing the energy system, I don't like to talk too much about reconstruction. I think we need to really also reset the thinking in terms of development of the energy system, in terms of development of the economic dynamics in the country. And I think it's important to work on the enabling condition that would facilitate the connections with international climate finance coming from donors, coming from MDBs, but also how to attract private capital. So we need to think in that kind of medium, long-term perspective. So these conditions are in no particular order. It's clearly that there are a number of interventions which are absolutely essential. Is the development of the grid and the introduction of competitive market mechanisms in the country. It's about the integration with other countries, strengthening the connections to other countries, both in terms of electricity system, but also in terms of logistics. It's about working on the demand side, and the demand side means energy efficiency in industry, trying to facilitate decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors. It's about buildings. It's about the transport system as well, because ultimately it's important not only to think in terms of the energy system as a supply story, but there is a strong demand story. And this is where is a critical condition, not only to optimize the investments on the energy supply side, but also to strengthen the competitiveness of the Ukrainian economy going forward. There is an element, of course, of strong focus on renewable energy across all type of renewable energy, wind, solar, but also the country still has a strong potential for biomass. And there are a number of value chains that are still underdeveloped. And I think, at EBRD, we have a number of programs to support this. That should be another area of priority. And last but not least, of course, is looking at the supporting the gradual phase out of the fossil fuel assets, particularly the coal assets. These, of course, will also require elements of just transition, so supporting the affected workers and the local communities and offering instruments to support economic diversification. Now, going back to your question about finance, these are conditions that are particularly important to structure financing instruments that combine concessional money coming from international donors, international programs, MDBs, IFIs funding, and in time also facilitate the space for renewable energy investments with private capital. We've seen in a lot of markets where we've been working on, for example, the renewable energy market systems and standards, we have been, focusing our finance towards the grid, towards strengthening the grid, expanding the grid, and we've been facilitating the development of renewable energy markets, for example, through corporate PPAs, so allowing private-to-private type of interactions. So maybe just to summarize, working on the policy is essential. There are the infrastructure piece, which of course are very relevant, and these are the conditions to attract both the concessional funding, but also very much the private capital. And maybe to close, at EBRD at the moment, we are very much supporting the energy sector. We're providing a number of liquidity loans to Naftogaz, to Ukrenergo, to continue operation in this current situation. So it will remain an area of strong focus for the EBRD.
Thank you very much. As I would, one more time, if you feel like asking questions to the participant, to the panel, to the panelists, please feel free. Okay, and in this case, I have a question for you. And with us, we are honored to have John Kreutz, and he is a Chief Executive Officer of the Rocky Mountains Institute and internationally recognized leader in global energy issues and climate change. And continuing the point of the green recovery of Ukraine, and continuing the point of the finances, what can be the market-driven energy solutions that could be incorporated in Ukraine? And then we would come back to the point where the law stands there. So can you please help?
Thank you, Evgenia. I'm gonna, Giampiero just laid out some of the assets that are required here. Rocky Mountain Institute, we've been around about 40 years working on the energy transition. We deploy market-based solutions at scale. And one area that we have a lot of experience in is hurricane recovery around the world in islands where grids are completely destroyed, where economic assets are completely destroyed, and how to recover quickly. And what we know from that work is that renewables work very quickly, that we can deploy them in modular forms at scale and quickly mobilize a workforce to manage, to do so in zones that quickly get economic activity back together. And so as we think about Ukraine, and as we think about the human tragedy and the absolutely horrific, dictatorial regime that has inflicted this, there are immediate opportunities to start deploying, kind of resilient mini grids and microgrids throughout the country to supplement and hopefully eventually displace the diesel that's being used today, because we know we can do that economically. We know that it works and that it can support immediate electrification within communities. And the interesting thing that Ukraine offers beyond, kind of the immediate resiliency shift is to showcase for Europe how to build a truly, kind of decarbonized industrial system. Because when we look at the steel, when we look at the large scale fertilizer and ammonia facilities and other things that Ukraine has, there's a tremendous opportunity to pioneer and lead the way, not just with renewables, solar, wind, deployment of large scale battery energy storage to the grid, but also to pioneer and lead on green hydrogen, to kind of develop and deploy self-sufficiency in that front. And that, kind of in the process of building that green industry, you create the necessary inputs to then decarbonize further and get to heat pumps and get to green cement and other things that are required. And because of the pace and scale that the opportunity in Ukraine is immense, there is a real opportunity to do this first, to do this fast, to do it at scale, and to really be a leader and a pioneer in establishing this next green energy system. So we think there is a massive opportunity working alongside others to do this. We've seen quite clearly that the European Union has aligned behind this. The United States, certainly with the designation of Penny Pritzker as being the special envoy on Ukraine, will similarly be looking to support and help use market-based approaches to deploy at scale, all starting with the green grid, but then flowing through the rest of the economy.
Does anybody like to ask any questions, comments? Okay, thank you. Then we made a little bit of the chaotic structure, like skipping to from the law, and I would like to come back to law, and I would like to come back to the point of the European Union. And here I would like to go to Professor Dr. Mikhail Rody, and who is the head of ICEM and the professor of the University of Greifswald. And ICEM is the Institute for Climate Protection, Energy and Mobility, that was the one of the founders of the European Ukraine Energy Transition Hub. And the question mainly is the fact that taking into consideration the European candidate status of Ukraine, which imposes obligations to adapt European Union law, including energy and climate law. There is a pretty extensive number of legislative work to be done. And what areas Ukraine has to prioritize? What do you think?
Thank you very much, Evgenia. I am very happy to be here under the umbrella of this Energy Transition Hub. It was just ennobled by the Vice President, Šefčovič, who made it really to a commission project, and I'm very grateful and want to thank Valentin, who has sort of given the impulse for doing it, and Evgenia, who worked a lot on the legal part. So we have preliminary studies. You see a lot of papers to start with. And for me, it's a very personal thing. 1 year before the war, my institute set up a huge project on how to produce and deliver hydrogen to Western Europe. And this crashed, and now I'm happy to switch to this project. Yeah, European Union law plays a vital central role in this transition for Ukraine. And I think it's a very good coincidence that we have the accession process in parallel to the transition process. European Union law gives a good, very good guideline, but you have to understand that in some areas, European Union law is very clear, precise, and detailed. And in other areas, you have Ukraine has a lot of leeway. In some areas, total leeway. For example, how to decarbonize, whether you use nuclear, whether you use renewables, carbon storage, etc. So what are the main things now on the agenda? I think still Ukraine has gone a very good way, but of course the internal energy market, to finalize it is absolutely important and has priority. Then with less prescription from the union, the energy transition, taking renewables, not nuclear, is a decentralized system, which is very good to make a country resilient against an aggression, by the way. And I think for me, this is an extremely important task to enable local distribution systems and local energy systems. Next point, I want to highlight CBAM. CBAM is really, Ukraine has to start thinking how to deal with it. You mentioned all this heavy industry of Ukraine. So how to deal with CBAM? Maybe join the EU ETS soon, but this is also tricky with 80 euro per ton. But you can recycle this money in an intelligent way to the industry again. Then, of course, the climate plan, the National Energy and Climate Plan has to be done. I heard it is done, but I haven't seen it yet. So let's see. And the last point I want to highlight is dealing with global experiences on just transition. Of course, here as well, Europe gives guidelines with a Just Transition Fund, but we don't have to forget the social aspects of this transition, what we now want to foster. Yeah, these are so the main things. I could continue for long, but these are for me some really top priorities.
Thank you. But apart from the priorities, you mentioned leeways, right? So what are the leeways for Ukraine? What lessons Ukraine should unlearn from the experience of the European countries, for example?
Yeah, so as a leeway, I mentioned first of all nuclear, because this is the most strategic decision where Ukraine is free. But yeah, let me take another example. I think Ukraine, not in all points, has now to lag behind and do what other countries have done, but go to the forefront. And I would like, because I'm dealing a lot with it in Germany, I would like to mention hydrogen, because this is a huge possibility, opportunity in Ukraine. And this is also for Western Europe an extremely important question, how to get to a hydrogen economy. And this is from the legal side extremely tricky. How to set up support schemes, how to deal with certification of hydrogen, how to deal with import, export. So Germany is very weak in that. We make bilateral things. This is so important. We have to have a consistent strategy with institutions who deal with that. I think this is a point Ukraine could go forward, should go forward.
Thank you very much for you being so much optimistic and believing in Ukraine. And that is really amazing. And like the help that has been delivered to Ukraine within different areas, it's really amazing. But I would like maybe then to ask our Ukrainian experts. And we have here with us Kyrylo Krivolap, and he's an executive director of the Center of Economic Recovery, advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine on public grounds. And Kyrylo has had like more than 20 years of experience working in private companies and government sector projects. But I have actually a pretty tricky question for you. Are there only positive sides of the green reconstruction? What are the biggest challenges from your perspective? From as somebody who has been working very close, and like we have announced the reconstruction, green reconstruction of Ukraine, that there are no doubt that it would be green and that we would align with the best international practices. But is it realistic? Is it feasible?
Yeah, how can we rely on this forecast that energy sector can be some sort of a growth point? So let's look at the numbers. So prior to the invasion, the energy sector was around 5% of GDP, which is not small. And it's about 3% of labor on the market. So it's big. And in 2022, of course, like the market conditions, economy was distorted, but it reached 9% of GDP. So it's a big part of our economy. And we have several projects with Harvard University, with Growth Lab, Ricardo Hausmann. They're researching these topics. And they like this idea of that countries should rely on so-called collective know-how of the country, not only on resources, not only on value chains, but also on this momentum of knowledge and engineers and everything. And in Ukraine, if you look at that critically, metallurgy is probably #1 sector where we have this capacity. Hydrogen appears to be that we are really close to it, and energy sector. So we have most of ways to produce energy in Ukraine. We have this know-how, and that's why we do believe in this energy sector. And if you look at opportunities for green hydrogen and green recovery, out of around 200 objects which use coal in Ukraine, 96 were destroyed, and only 1/3 of it was recovered. So we are making this transition from the coal, thanks to Russian Federation, of course, but in this new plan, there will be canceling coal up to 2035, and it's feasible with that. And if we want to recover, let's recover it in renewables, because of course, there are a lot of people in Ukraine who are fond of nuclear sector, but it's a sort of misjudgment, because we kind of need to build new nuclear or refresh old ones, and it takes money. We are now reserving money for reconstruction of nuclear blocks or closing those blocks, and we saving money only for 1 blocks out of 14. So it's a big trick that we say nuclear energy is cheap, but it's not. So we need to consider that. So recovering with, at some extent, with gas peakers, it is in our energy strategy, but heavily relying on renewables, it's a good idea. And of course, like keeping our nuclear as a basis, it will never go away, like for some, at least in short-term perspective. But in hydrogen, we have chemical industry where hydrogen is a byproduct. We already kind of have it. We have transportation lines. We can use it for hydrogen. We will recover our metallurgy. It's a no-brainer. Metal and iron, it's the material of the future, as well as many other metals like titanium, other things. So we will do that. Why not to do it in a new way? And we can build sustainable green economy inside Ukraine and then export that. So yes, I do believe, and I think that we should believe in this energy sector, but there are also a lot of different barriers to do that. I'm not sure, maybe we'll have another round of discussions how to make it happen.
Thank you. Then in this case, like of the potential for renewables energy generation in Ukraine, because you've touched on the topic that it is something that is of a great perspective for Ukraine. Dr. Valentin Gvozdy has been supporting the launch of the European Ukraine Energy Transition Hub and has made an incredible work to make it happen. So can you please share your take on that?
Thank you, Eugenia. So I'm really happy to be here and see all of these great people together. And let me just share a little bit who I am. I was trained as a lawyer, and I do a lot of energy law. But I also used to be a chair of supervisory board of the biggest hydropower generation company in Ukraine, Ukrhydroenergo. This is the second largest producer today of the energy after nuclear generation in the country. We keep 21% of energy mix currently after Zaporizhzhia nuclear station was capped by Russians. So it's very important because we are a green producer. And for me, also not only like for a person who work in energy sector, but also a lawyer, it was really an honor to be a part of this initiative, because I want just to inform that one of the important pillar of this initiative, together with financial technical pillars, is a legal pillar. We developed a preliminary legal study. We compared the current situation in Ukraine. We actually identified within the project, because I was one of those who was working on these preliminary studies, and we identified a lot of problems, a lot of points which we have to work on in the closest future together with Ukrainian parliament, with Ukrainian government. And we received full support from the Ukrainian government. Yulia Sviridenko, first Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine and Minister of Economy, opened this event in European Commission building last month, together with Executive Vice President of European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič. She confirmed that this hub, this energy transition initiative, is very important for Ukraine. And one more time, I want to say thank you also to our sponsor, to Breakthrough Energy, Bill Gates Foundation, who was so generous to support this initiative, and it happened because of his support. But answering your question, Evgenia, of course, renewables have great potential in Ukraine, but we're not only looking for classic solutions, we're looking for future interesting, unique, and super modern solutions. And Ukraine can be a great place where those solutions can be pioneering. Today, we have to look how to produce not only hydrogen, because hydrogen is very good if you have enough electricity, enough energy. Sometimes we have lack of energy. Sometimes we need to store this energy now in Ukraine because of this disaster, because of those attacks. So we're looking through the battery storages, but also we considering hydrogen production as a storage. But if you convert hydrogen into a storage, then you need to understand that it should be a market. There is no market in Ukraine currently of the hydrogen, because we don't have those businesses who can rely on those producers who can produce this hydrogen. And here, the aim of this energy transition hub also to create financial environment. It doesn't mean that we are looking where to take money. No, we just create financial instruments. We need to teach Ukrainian business. We need to create environment for international investors who will understand clearly how to invest. Is it safe or not? We need to develop all modern and available ecological instruments like green bonds, etc., etc. We need to create new financial instruments, how to raise investment for development, because money are not falling down from the sky, and people will not invest if they will not be sure that their money are safe. Investment, unfortunately, has such unpleasant, let's say, feature that they have to go back to investor with a plus. So we need to remember that. And modern Ukrainians understand that very well. And also, this is another goal of our project, to create environment comfortable for investment into renewable, and not only renewable, to the market. We also pay a lot of attention to future design of the market. We pay a lot of attention to the regulator, because we need to be sure that our investor will trust that in Ukraine we have in place independent regulator. You know that we have some issues on that topic, and we also need audit of the regulator. It's also something we have just on the paper, but not in reality. So it's long way to do. It's a lot of things we should do, but the main aim of this project, which we visiting today, is to help future Ukrainian energy sector to look and to be, not just look, to be designed like normal, open, safe environment for investments. And it should be very healthy. It should be very open, and it should be very connected to European one, because we're part of the Europe. Even if our sponsors and experts actually also outside of the Europe, we collaborate also with Canadian, Japanese, American experts around the world, J7 countries, but we still a part of the Europe, and our future is in the Europe. So we need to think how to make it fast, how to make it effective, and how to make it professional. That's why it's absolutely super valuable, this expertise from European experts who provide their best knowledge based on their experience to Ukraine. And we are really grateful that this initiative actually can offer us this experience. This is really something what we need. And I'm really grateful to all of you, dear ladies and gentlemen, that you find your time to be here today, to listen and to contribute. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, On. Then I suggest that we maybe ask every one of you. I know that we will come back more to more comprehensive presentation of Anna afterwards, but maybe we can ask every one of you to give us the key tips how to ensure that this becomes a fast transition, market-based transition, and that it is really the way how Ukraine is aiming to, despite all of the challenges and, of course, like ongoing circumstances that Ukraine is in.
A couple of points also on the back of what Valentin was just mentioning, and also your question about lessons learned from the European sort of trajectory and evolution of the energy system. It's important to create the right understanding of risks and opportunities, and it's also important to channel finance, the right financial products towards the right uses. And I'll give you a couple of examples. It's important to direct private capital towards those investments that don't need necessarily incentives or subsidies. Renewable energy is one of those cases. So how to do it? Again, lessons from Europe. Try to find the way to facilitate the permitting process. In most of the European Union, permitting process is very long. Takes years before permits are allocated to connect to the grid or to install capacity. Make sure that you have market-based instruments to facilitate renewable energy investments, like private-to-private contracts, and concentrate the concessional instruments towards the non-revenue generating investments, like the grid development and like the just transition. Just a couple of weeks ago, we supported an auctioning process in Uzbekistan, right? And this is about wind capacity. So the final price of this auction is $4 per kilowatt hour, including an element of battery storage. So there is no reason why this type of price will not be sort of supported in Ukraine. So the combination of different financial instruments for different purposes, but also very much looking at market instruments that can facilitate private capital to flow into the country.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you one recent story in Ukraine. I was moderating the panel on Kiev International Economic Forum, where we had a Minister of Energy, head of Ukrenergo, head of Naftogaz, head of DTEC, so like major players on the market, like everybody to talk to. And head of Naftogaz said that, hey, is there any other country in the world where before the winter season, every politician, every head of state-owned enterprises is reporting how well we are prepared for the winter. So how much gas we accumulated, how much reserves we have for it. He said the main conclusion was that all of them were really tired of this market absence in Ukraine, of this distortion, of this manual things. He said, like, can you imagine like Biden, for example, or Macron meeting people in their country and say, like, we're ready for the winter. We created manually such conditions that we are totally protected from the cold. No, we need to speak on normal market. We need to speak on prices, not tariffs. And actually, I asked each of them how do they evaluate impact on people actually. And in gas sector, it was around 1.3 times bigger, but in like 3, 5 years, 10 years perspective, it doesn't matter. It depends on the war, it depends on how do we protect our people, how do we finance them. But again, we need to switch to subsidies, not to like low tariffs. So it's not a big number. It's not like 5 times, not 10 times. The same for energy sector. We need to increase these tariffs for people in some given time, but it's not the matter of like 3 or 4 times. It's much, much less, and we can make a projection for it and do it normally. And cancel or make it higher those price caps, get rid of these social responsibility, social obligations instruments, and have a normal market. Because now in Ukraine, if you are an investor, elephant in the room is security factor, of course, like providing Ukraine with anti-air missiles, it's an economic measure, normal economic measure, just another day in the office, like some sort of it. And then we understand that we need to switch to those market conditions so investor would understand he could make a business plan, because now investor cannot make a business plan for a year or two because he doesn't know what will be the manual regulation of the market in a year. Imagine a country where you cannot even make a business plan. So there is a big opportunity, as I said before, but there is already a tiredness of key stakeholders of the situation. And it's good news that they are ready to change it. It's just a matter of expertise and dialogue, how fast, what are the instruments, etc. But in like several years, prices in the Ukrainian market will be the same as in Poland or Hungary, in our neighbors with all this and so interconnections, etc. We need to get ready for it. And major stakeholders and state-owned enterprises, they will be happy if the market will be normal, it will be vivid. And finally, we will not see our politicians reporting how well we are ready for the winter.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that we know this is a massive multi-year effort that needs to take place, and it needs to start right now in terms of the investments, but really ensuring that the investors come in requires first and foremost that there be plans, right? That there be very clear transition plans in place, and in particular, getting there, you know, kind of getting the capital in and the physical assets in quickly requires an immediate attention to the grid, you know, kind of what is the renewable energy plan when we think about how are decentralized energy solutions going to be brought in, compensated, ultimately deployed at scale. And I would say there should be a special emphasis on storage and its role, because that's going to be a critical element of how these assets actually ensure the investable returns in the end, right? Secondly, I think we know there's the industrial base challenge, and having, again, the plan very clear on what's the role of hydrogen, how are we thinking about the sequencing of shifting and building out in the metals capacity, how do we think about the restoration of the chemicals industry, et cetera. Being able to paint that picture starts to create the investment case again for the investors to come in and the physical assets to be deployed, right? And then the third one is the urban infrastructure, right? And where and how do we see, you know, kind of the restoration of commercial and residential fully. And those three things, when you combine them, create the confidence builder that ultimately encourages and suggests the business as usual scenario, right? That there may be a war going on, but there absolutely is a plan to manage and ensure that those who invest now can see how they're going to get a disproportionate return going forward, and how some of the capital that's being lined up to de-risk through philanthropy, through concessionary finance, et cetera, is actually sweetening and helping to ensure that there is security in the investment in the first place. And I think those types of confidence building can make what is already a very rational economic decision even more compelling.
Thank you. Are we going to share the other tips, right? But maybe before, we would very quickly bring the United Nations Development Program perspective with us. We are honored to have Anna Zhavtenko, who is representing UNDP in Ukraine. So you have prepared a pretty comprehensive presentation for us to show like what UNDP is doing in Ukraine. Maybe you can give us the landscape, what is like the priorities, and then what are your pieces of tips of advice for Ukraine? What are your vision for what UNDP is bringing up to ensure the green and just energy transition in Ukraine?
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to speak today and to present UNDP's vision of energy transition, but not only vision, but also some practical things we already do. Could I have my presentation, please, to visualize the work we do and our plans? Ukraine's rapid damage and needs assessment prepared jointly by UNDP and World Bank shows that the next slide, please. Showed that the damage to the energy infrastructure is caused by war is more than $10 billion US. And last winter, an average Ukrainian household had to endure 5 cumulative weeks of the blackouts. They were with no electricity. You can see some figures, just next slide and the other slide, please. You can see some figures from the report. It's already published, so please visit our website to learn the details. I won't describe them all now. Rebuilding the energy infrastructure is critical to provide energy access for the people of Ukraine and increase the share of renewable energy sources. UNDP in Ukraine works in line with the priorities set by the government of Ukraine in the revised national energy strategy of Ukraine. Next slide, please. UNDP have provided large-scale energy equipment to replace and improve generation and maneuver capacity in energy system. In 2023, we provided the next slide, please. We provided the electricity sources for communities across Ukraine and secured access to the electricity for more than 500,000 people. We continue this work, and next year we'll provide this access for 10 million people. We also doing feasibility studies and capacity building on local level. Strengthening the critical energy infrastructure and decentralizing the energy system is prerequisite for the energy transition following the impact of the war. Solid data and analysis crucial in this case. So next, please. Next slide, please. UNDP. Next slide. UNDP in Ukraine has recently prepared the overview of the current situation on the Ukraine's renewable energy sources market, which gives the rough estimation of the damage to the renewable energy sector in Ukraine and recommendations to the sector for the next 2 to 5 years. The estimations show that there is a need of $30 billion of investment into this sector. The next slide, please. Some key findings are displayed on the slides. The research will be published shortly. Next slide, please. To further accelerate the green transition within the GF-funded project, removing barriers to increase investment in energy and efficiency in public buildings, UNDP enhances energy efficiency in public buildings by facilitating of the energy service market development. They completed 53 ESCA contracts, saved more than 22,000 megawatt of energy, and we are now working on a pipeline with more than 250 projects, and we'll pilot in not only classical, so-called classical energy service, but also the model of energy service which foresees the installation of the solar power plant on the healthcare and water supply facilities. Next slide, please. We also simplified the procurement procedure of the energy service and working on the establishment of the ESCA fund to provide companies the access to the financing. Next slide, please. UNDP also facilitates governance reforms and policy framework development by preparing of the law on climate change, white paper on distributed generation, and Build Back Greener report, which was presented in this pavilion a couple of days ago. Based on analysis of Ukrenergo data and UNDP's report, another report, you can also find it on our website, toward the green transition of the energy sector in Ukraine. Ukraine's power system remains extremely vulnerable. We are now aiming at compiling the set of the green energy projects to support the restoration of the critical infrastructure and enhance decentralization of the energy sector. In Ukraine, feasibility studies will be prepared to create a tailor-made approach on a local level to address each city's and Hromada's needs. Next slide, please. And next one. One promising area to explore is energy consumption, where individuals and communities generate renewable energy for their own use. This will contribute into the nexus between energy security and green transition. Next slide, please. To enable technological transformation and a gradual shift to market financing, it is critical to support the development of institutional capacities on national and municipal level. That's why UNDP has developed a comprehensive approach to Ukraine's energy sector, which is meant to contribute to self-sufficient and sustainable energy supply and access to population through locally led recovery and adaptation of green energy sources and technologies. This approach includes two main outcomes. Please, next slide. First one is improved short-term response to the energy system, which means successful rehabilitation of high voltage and medium voltage substations, logistics and maneuvering capacities of Ukrainian energy sector companies, and backup power generation for municipal infrastructure. And the other one is enhanced long-term resilience of the energy system achieved by decentralizing power generation and storage, which foresees decentralized model of green energy generation, enhancing energy efficiency in public buildings, governance reforms, implementation of financial mechanisms, and enhanced commercial capacities through the development of expertise in investment attraction and energy market strategies. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the last one. UNDP has a number of unique advantages which that will ensure that we achieve the results. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or you want to receive the publications, please contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you again for supporting Ukraine. And I would really love us to come back to the questions, your tips of advice, right? Like Drone, because like with the help of your presentation, we could have seen how comprehensive like the support could be, how big it is, and in so many areas, and with the with all of the expertise that has been gathered in this room for this panel discussion, we can really see that it is about the prospects of Ukraine to recover and to ensure that the energy transition, that the post-war recovery of Ukraine would be fast and furious. And again, we have been talking about positive things, but then let me provoke you a little bit. What are the biggest challenges? Coming back, the biggest challenges from your perspective to ensure the post-war reconstruction of the energy sector of Ukraine in the way how we would really want it to be, in order that we really ensure the green recovery and green reconstruction. How we can be sure that it is really always green, how we can make it really green. And from your perspective, from your expertise, what could be still, except for the prospects, but what could be the biggest challenges? Maybe, yes.
Yes, I'll happily volunteer. Also in competition. I think we're doing better again in the acoustic competition with our neighbors. And my suggestion, I want to turn the challenge into an opportunity, is the challenge is often, you look at the short-term costs of measures that could be taken, but immediately they just seem very costly, and one takes an easier way. And one example would be, and I'm trying to sort of zero in on the CBAM. So, I participated in the CBAM impact assessment, working with the Commission at the time that they were looking at which countries would be most affected. In the status quo ante, if you like, so a few years ago, Ukraine was one of the most affected countries, highly energy intensive industry, relatively carbon intensive power grid, and of course, a tremendous share of those metallurgical, so the aluminum, steel, etc., exports to the EU. If one rebuilt the sector as it was previously and avoided introducing costs through, for instance, a carbon price, one faces a situation in which Ukraine is essentially having, its producers pay a tremendous amount of money to the EU, which goes into the general EU budget, rather than keeping that, and facing a competitive disadvantage to producers everywhere else, more or less. And I see an alternative vision in which the CBAM, coupled with smart policy choices in Ukraine, can turn Ukrainian steel and aluminum and even electricity into something where they have a significant comparative advantage. If Ukraine takes this opportunity to pioneer with all the tools that we heard about, pioneer ultra low carbon steel making capabilities, hydrogen, direct reduced iron, aluminum with zero carbon electricity, and so on, not only does one retain the opportunity to compete more successfully with producers like China that also export into the EU market, because even with European producers, the Ukrainian producers might have a comparative advantage. European producers face a carbon price, and they are often then more carbon intensive than some of these super, low carbon production processes could provide. I would accompany that with the introduction of a carbon price. And this is the challenge where I see sort of in the current situation, it would seem maybe absurd to think about introducing a price that may burden producers domestically, that also eventually sort of trickles through to the consumers. Doesn't seem like a smart idea. But I think if one has a longer term plan to sort of phase this in until 2026, 27, 28, 29, 30, since you would be building capabilities with renewable energy and zero carbon steel and iron and aluminum production, the carbon pricing burden wouldn't actually be that high, But by the point that you start having this carbon price introduced, and then you open the door, you create it, you make it much easier at some point then also to link to the EU ETS or become part of the EU ETS, it creates, I think, an enabling package that also, I would say, even creates confidence in foreign investors that see that, this is an ecosystem in which ultra low carbon technologies are being piloted. They have a carbon price that will be compatible with the EU. All of this to me makes a lot of sense, but it is a challenge to see the 5 to 10 year perspective rather than to look sort of at the 1 to 2 year perspective.
Yeah,
Would you like-
challenges. I would like to add, as a good lawyer, we need a good law, and this goes much further than the acts, the individual acts for energy transition. You need a comprehensive good law, like also for investment security, and so on. And I think what we are now challenged in Germany is a challenge everywhere. How to combine the need for decentralization of the energy system with a consistent central planning. A planning for decades, which is rolling, which has to adapt all the time. And with that, you also need a financing system which is secure over decades and has a capacity to adapt. I think so. We are doing research at that, and our Ministry for Climate Affairs and Economic Affairs now tries to introduce it. Extremely important law and governance.
Can you please bring your perspective? Can you please bring your perspective? Like, what are the biggest challenges so that we know what we need to omit, what we need to prevent?
Yeah, so I already talked about confidence, right? And the need to make sure that we've got international confidence. One of the biggest challenges is that Ukraine is trying to rebuild its economy at the same time that we have massive, massive supply chain pull around the world for clean energy technologies, right? And I think that's something that we need to be aware of, that there's a risky environment for investors in the Ukraine alongside a global demand pull. And so how does Ukraine ultimately get the resources that it needs in order to make this transition quickly? And that, in part, is going to be the trick, right? It's going to be Ukraine has to build, not just promise, but deliver the most advanced decarbonized industrial economy in the world, right? And that, as it does that, it becomes the natural magnet for further investment. But we've got to get that started, right? And getting that started means that more of the transition has to come from inside Ukraine as it builds, even amidst a war, the capacity to nucleate that confidence and compete in snarled global supply chains with local resources and assets. And the great thing is that Ukraine has the natural resources and the ability to do just that, right? And so this is both the promise and the challenge of the moment. But ultimately, I think the message has to be that Ukraine will be the most sophisticated decarbonized economy in the world. And in the process, it will continue to decarbonize itself. It will decarbonize Europe. It will, in fact, kind of rise from what we saw in terms of destructive numbers to be a fully rebuilt modern economy.
Zhenya, I think that the biggest challenge for us and for everyone who want to work with us, with Ukrainians, is not just listen and believe, is to witness the result, the delivery. And I believe that Ukrainian current young generation understands that very well. So stop talking, just do it. And it's not about Nike, it's about Ukraine.
As a project manager, I wanted to add one of the challenges that might arise, that if we want to have decentralized generation, this project will happen in regions. And here we need to facilitate the pipeline of the projects and help to increase institutional capacity of the local authorities to identify and prepare the projects for example, for energy efficiency, modernization of their buildings. And at the same time, we need to provide more training for the people who will prepare the project designs with new requirements, which will be more aligned with the green transition requirements. Thank you.
In light of recent talks about architecture of our climate policy, about goals which were announced by the minister today, we need to build this capacity inside, because there is a big political wish. We have revised this national contribution, which is quite ambitious. We have all the necessary presidential decrees and resolutions on our green transition. We have understanding what it means to be recovering green. So there is a political will. Then goes the expertise. And my message to our international partners is that we do need advice and we do need these technical support projects. And we do need your knowledge because, for example, in developed countries, in most of the developed countries, Ministry for Environment already constructed a trade system, already constructed basic rules, and now Ministry of Economy kind of leverages and uses it. And the Ministry of Environment works with only like red books, spiders or something like that, water, land, etc. But in Ukraine, we need to build this expertise in Ministry of Environment, let them do their job, then transfer it to Ministry of Economy and let them do the job, and everybody, and then go to projects and have those teams who know what to do. Because in terms of trade system, I think we already understand more or less what to do. In terms of how do we transform carbon tax? Well, there are some talks planned on January, but there is no clear vision on it. Climate fund, should we have the same system and tax fuel, for example, transport? We don't do this in ecology type of doing things. So we need to learn that, we need advice from you on that. But from my perspective, from what I see inside the government, we are much more ready than we were like a year before, 2 years before. Even during this COP, we have Ministry of Environment in larger presence. We have Ministry of Energy in larger presence. So we have my colleague advisor to the Prime Minister on energy sector also here. So we're moving forward in this regard. We just need this moral and technological and financial support to do that.
Thank you. We are about to finish, but if you are open to comment on something finally. Okay. Please do.
As you were saying, moving forward, I saw it on the wall, moving forward. So you mentioned, the carbon tax, and I wanted to add, I very strongly believe that it would be a very advisable thing to think of a carbon price pathway that over 5 to 10 years leads to convergence with the EU. I argued that before because it creates not only sort of the ability to become part of the EU ETS, avoid the CBAM, it allows you to keep the revenue in the country, but it also creates an enabling, if you like, an enabling context for investments. Investors know if there is this gradually rising carbon price, you don't see investment in carbon intensive, production, manufacturing processes, etc. But I'd also encourage you to think about one other thing in the area of fiscal policy. And John and I live in the United States, and we see a very different approach being used right now legislatively in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act in particular, also some other legislation. And that's to use tax policy and especially tax credits as an instrument to stimulate, to attract investment. There are legitimate questions about, the long-term fiscal, the budget impacts, etc., that have to be taken into account. But there's also no question of how effective in the near term this approach has been. If you look at sort of investment in new construction and manufacturing, in new low carbon or clean manufacturing, MIT just has released a study, the Clean Investment Monitor. You see after a decade or more of relatively plateauing investment, this dramatic tripling, almost quadrupling of investment in manufacturing. In Europe, in countries like Germany, it's steady to declining. That is a tool that could be explored, I think, again, with caution. The fiscal space in Ukraine is a very different one than it is in the United States. But in the very short term, as you also, I think, create sort of more fiscal space with the carbon price over the medium and long term, that might be an instrument to also look at how it's working in the US and deploy.
Yeah, I want to comment and follow up that this is really important. I think that even our project should have into consideration this point, because this is something we need to develop in Ukraine. We have great potential, but we need support and we need more understanding how to do it in reality. So thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you very much for you and for finding the time to join us. And this is a kind reminder of the project. Can we please go to the next slide? Yeah, so this was the vision, and mission of the project that was launched, the one that Valentin kindly mentioned. And can we please go for the next slide? Yes, so here you can reach our technical, legal, and financial preliminary studies that were presented. And with the help of you all, with the help of the international expertise, with the help of the national expertise, definitely we will do it. So at this point, thank you very much for this amazing motto that you have brought up. And it's not only for the future generations, for the youth, it's about all of us. And with the help of the common actions, like with the help of the international support, with the help of the international expertise, and including those who have been extensively working in Ukraine, we really can do it. And we really can ensure that the post-war recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine, especially the energy sector, would be achieved taking into consideration the best available technologies ever. Thank you so much. It was incredibly great. Yes, please.
No, just thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. It was really amazing.